What's your name?
Adele.
How old are you, Adele?
3.
Your birthday's in October, right?
October, right.
What's your favorite thing to do, Adele?
Painting.
What can you paint, Adele?
I can paint pictures.
What kind of pictures?
The rainbow.
It's been said that the events in our lives are like branches on a tree, and as we go through life, we accumulate more and more branches, and we create stories about the events that occur in our lives, and eventually, as we get older, all the different stories that we've created form a very specific type of tree, which could be our persona, our identity, our story. And for me recently, I realized that after many, many years of just really, really struggling with my childhood and my relationship with my mother, and working diligently, I'm talking extremely difficult and challenging emotional and therapeutic work, that my story had changed. And I actually hadn't realized it until someone else pointed it out to me. And it happened in a relatively short period of time. It's kind of like one of those things where, the accumulation of years and years and years of working on something, all of a sudden, you get your overnight fix, which is, I feel like that's kind of what happened. But there were some specific events that kind of triggered that and set it in motion for me, and I just really want to share that today. I've been holding off on making this video for a while because it was not perfect. I wanted to have the perfect outline, the perfect points to make, the perfect everything. You know me, my videos are typically highly edited. I just want to talk candidly about this. I will make videos in the future, so I don't have to get every single thing into this one video. So if you're interested in hearing more about this story, please hit the subscribe button and click like if you want more videos straight from the heart. So I guess for my long-term viewers, this has been a long time coming, and I know that there are a lot of you now who are going to be watching this and feeling joy in your heart or your eyes welling with tears, because a lot of you have been with me on this journey. I've been sharing about recovering from narcissistic abuse and from my mother, and neglect, and just like the most treacherous and betraying behavior that a parent could inflict on their child, trying to overcome that in my adulthood. So I'm going to get into what I experienced as a child, what I've done to work through it, what actually worked for me, and the epiphany I had that led me to realize that I had actually forgiven my mother. And it wasn't something that I had gotten coerced in or guilted into or felt like I had to do in order to make the law of attraction work or something like that. It was an organic process for me that came as a result of learning to just really feel a deep sense of gratitude for who I am. And I think that's one gift that you get from a narcissistic parent when you do the work, is you learn in depth and in detail your specific virtues. In comparison to them, in spite of them, because of them. I know if I hadn't gone through what I went through as a child, I would not be the person I am today. Of course, I don't recommend it. So I've got a couple of disclaimers for this video. I usually don't like making disclaimers as far as I see it. If people are offended, that's fine. They can use that for their own personal self-growth to learn about themselves. But I feel like there are some things I really want to make clear so that I don't have to keep repeating myself and qualifying this throughout the video. The first one is that this is not a judgment on anyone who has not forgiven their parents. I want you to know this from my heart to yours, that if you're watching this video and you're feeling resistance, I'm with you. I haven't left you. I'm there with you in your resistance because I know what that feels like. And I want you to know that no one, and this is like so counter to what you commonly see, right? But I want you to know that no one has the right to tell you that you have to forgive, or to guilt you into forgiving, or tell you that the law of attraction is not going to work for you if you don't forgive your parents, or you're going to get cancer if you don't forgive your parents, or any other, emotionally abusive and manipulative thing that you've already probably experienced in your childhood. No one has the right to come and tell you that you have to forgive. If you don't feel it in your heart that it's time, it's not your time. And be with yourself in that lack of forgiveness. Love yourself through that in a way you were not loved when you had negative emotions as a child. Love the side of you that will not forgive. Sit with that side of yourself and say, man, if I went through what you did, I wouldn't want to forgive either. And we don't have to. We can stay here for as long as you want. And I mean that. Right? Really tell that to yourself, saying, if I die not forgiving my parent, it's okay. Actually be with yourself for once. That was one thing that I really had to learn, because I learned to abandon any side of myself that would, cause problems for my mother, right? And that causes problems for other people too. A lot of people are very uncomfortable with having stood by and done nothing while you suffered as a child, or from forgiving their own parents while they still don't feel it in their heart, or from having hurt their own children. So when they see you, they're going to immediately tell you, forgive, 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 because it makes them uncomfortable, right? To me, it's really strange how a person's first reaction to someone who's like, I will not, I'm still angry at this person, is not to get curious. You're like, wow, like, it seems like you're really holding on to that. Like, I wonder why, like, what happened that I don't know about? Can we talk about it? No, they throw up a wall and they tell you to forgive. And I'm not doing that to you, I never will. And I will always be on the side of anyone who suffered as a child and is trying to work through their issues later in life and take responsibility for their own feelings. And I remember in a Jordan Peterson talk, he said that if you're still kind of stewing over something 6 months after it's happened, that there's some work you need to do there, or there's a part of yourself that feels like there's still a danger, right? And so if you are having trouble forgiving your parent, many years later, there's a side of you that recognizes that there is still danger there. That danger could be more abuse from the parent. That danger could be from a relationship where you've recreated the dynamic you had with your parent, and now that person is inflicting similar abuse on you, which has happened to me, of course. It's happened to probably all of you who grew up with that kind of a figure to model your life on. So my second disclaimer is because I have received letters and emails from people whose parents have said to them, we weren't good parents, but, Adele had horrible parents and she turned out just fine, to further shame and manipulate their own children using my videos. So I just want to say that I did not turn out fine. No, I have suffered immensely in my life. The depth of suffering that I've experienced is intense. And I almost didn't make it, I've dealt with suicidal thoughts like my whole life. This pain has consumed my life. And I just want to say that if you are a parent who is watching this video, search inside your heart right now if the reason why you're watching this is to make yourself feel better because you've hurt your children. This is not a video for you. Do not use this video to rationalize your behavior. I would just recommend that you go and talk to a therapist. And so those are my disclaimers for this video. So I came to the realization that I had come to peace with this finally, because I had started dating someone. This was about 4 months ago. And like most socially awkward and housebound YouTubers, I found the best way to meet people was on online dating. And on my online dating profile, there was a section where you're supposed to put like something that you don't normally reveal to people. And I actually just shared from the heart that I came from a single mother family and I'd experienced emotional abuse as a child, but I had been working through this my entire life. It's really given me depth and grace to my personality, and that I have many older mentors and friends who are like family to me. So it was something that I put out there, and so I ended up seeing this person, and we would go on dates, and we were getting to know each other, and we were talking about our experiences and about our childhoods. And at one point, he just pointed out, I know that you've said this about your mother, but everything I'm hearing about your childhood is really positive. And I just had to stop, and think, gosh, like what's going on there? And this change occurred within me probably in the past 6 months to a year. If you look at my previous videos, I would talk about my mother or my childhood, and there was this vibe to me that was like complaining and kind of whining almost. But here I was talking now about my childhood, and as I'm sharing these things with this person to help them get a sense of who I am and where I come from, and I'm realizing that I had a lot of really great things about my childhood that a lot of people didn't have. And I'd like to use this portion of the video to talk about the great things about my childhood. One thing people don't know is that my name, it's an uncommon spelling of the name. I was actually named after Adele Davis, who was a famous nutritionist and teacher in the 80s. So my father was like a bodybuilder, and my mother was really into psychology and alternative health and nutrition. Growing up, we didn't eat processed foods. We weren't allowed junk foods. That came later as my mom developed emotional problems and got into eating. That came later, but in the formative years of our lives, we were fed very good nutrition, high quality fats, filtered water, breast milk, fresh vegetables. We used to grow vegetables in our garden. And I feel like that contributed a lot to our health, our intelligence. We also co-slept for a long time. So I have really fond memories of this. I have mixed memories of this. But my mother, my brothers, and I all slept in the same bed when we were young. That created a real sense of somatic security. And I remember my brother and I used to always kind of argue. Well, we didn't argue, we had a system, but it was always who got to sleep on the outside or the inside of the bed, right? Because then you would have my mom and then a sibling on the other side, so you got to sleep in the middle. And we would take turns doing that. And I feel like that created a real somatic sense of learning how to be secure and feeling secure in the middle, and then having the next night to sleep on the outside. And still, it teaches you a bit more independence and learning to be comfortable in that way, but still also knowing that you'll be able to return to the security. So I feel like it did something positive for our attachment systems as well. We also read books together and prayed together every night growing up. I think that's hugely fundamental for a number of reasons. But I had forgotten these little things. My mother taught me to read when I was 2 years old. I feel like that is a huge part of my personality because I was developing my brain in very specific ways from a very young age. And I've always had a very high level of reading comprehension because of that. I remember my brother started reading at a young age too. And to this day, he's got a very diverse and impressive vocabulary. He's a very engaging storyteller, brilliant, smart guy, both of my brothers. But I remember my one brother, he and I used to walk to the library, and it was about a 20-minute walk one way. But we were obsessed. We were obsessed with reading. And they had, I remember when summer would go out, the local library would have contests, reading contests for the kids. And so you would sign up for this contest and you would get a little horse with your name on it, and there would be this long board with how many books you had to read to move your horse to the next notch. And it was really funny because, there's me and my brother. Ours is always really far ahead of all the other children. And I mean, the amount of books that we were reading was ridiculous. I remember even one time the librarians was like, okay, are you actually reading these books? And I had this big pile that I was bringing back. And she's like, okay, I'm just gonna ask you a question. She opened it, she's asking me random questions about the book. And I was like, I knew all the answers. And they're like, okay, all these kids are reading all of these freaking books and winning all of these prizes. We were also really encouraged towards science with my mother. And she just had a natural interest and love for science and astronomy, and she exposed us to that as well. We grew up near a space and science center, so we were in there learning about the planets, about the stars, about gravity, and we had all these weird little scientific toys that we would play with and stuff like that. She also really encouraged us towards being outdoors. And as some of you know, that's a huge part of my life now. I've found a lot of solace in nature. When I was a kid, my mother had a family friend, a girl she was friends with in high school, who married a farmer and moved to BC. And so in the summers, we would go out and spend time on this ranch in BC. And so I grew up, spending summers in the middle of nowhere, learning how to milk cows, running in the fields all day, collecting eggs, learning how to ride horses, learning how to shoot guns, making tree houses. They had a young son, and he and I were best friends. We were like kids. I remember just being in nature. I had a pet chicken. There was one chicken that took a liking to me, and I would carry this chicken around. That became a huge part of my personality. It's still a part of my personality today, and it's really helped me cope with life and just to enjoy nature and enjoy beauty and enjoy animals. I was encouraged towards animals. There were puppies that gave birth. We saw cows giving birth. We saw animals dying and living, the cycle of life. I was exposed to all these beautiful things as a young person. I don't know how she managed it, but I was also sent to a lot of prestigious summer camps growing up. I think they have programs for poor people, which to this day I don't know if that was a bad idea or a good idea. I think it's a great idea because it exposed me to different types of people, exposed me to rich kids, right? And it gave me the same opportunities that they had. So I spent time in these camps. I was doing things like whitewater rafting. I learned archery. I learned how to ride horses. I learned how to paddle a canoe, how to stake a tent. I was doing all these amazing things. Of course, I was the outcast. I was the only dark-skinned kid, and I was the poor one. So I was ostracized. I was weird too, right? Like I told you, like I liked books. I didn't want to talk about boys or anything like that, and so I got ridiculed a lot. But all of these experiences, like most people raised in North America or in Canada, they don't get the kind of experiences that I had firsthand. I feel very blessed for that, and that was all my mother. Whatever her motivations were, I don't know. I'm glad she had them, and I am really grateful that I had a childhood like that. Now we can get to the second part of the realization I had that for forgiving my mother. Now, this happened again about a couple of months ago, and I had had a disagreement with someone, and I had said some things, not rashly, but things that seemed to make sense to me at the time. And then later I thought about it and I really regretted it and how it may have hurt that person. So the next time we met up, I just said, you know, I really want to let you know that I thought about what I said the other day, and I can see how it could have actually been misunderstood. I do not want you to think that in any way. This is actually how I feel, and I want you to know that I am so sorry. And that person told me that they understood, and that they were glad that, you know, we'd reached a consensus on that. And then they just looked at me with this real pure intent and complete, you know, straightforward honestness and said, I forgive you. And it really hit home with me, but also in that moment, something happened. And I realized a couple of things. The first was that no one had actually said that to me in my life. I'd never heard those words. And I've apologized many times in my life, but growing up, I had been the black sheep, the whipping horse. You know, I was the one who it was okay to hate, and it was okay to blame everything on Adele. I remember, you know, after I moved out from home when I was in high school, working 2 jobs, going to high school, and trying to maintain advanced placement classes, because of how bad the abuse from my mother was. She told my younger brothers that I left the family, right? This woman who had 3 kids with all 3 different dads, none of which who stuck around, is telling them that I'm the one who left the family, for example, right? And I actually did take that on. Like, I felt really guilty about it for a really long time. I remember when I was a kid, I would do things, careless things that kids do, and sometimes they had really bad effects. I remember one time, I can't remember how old I must have been. I must have been rather young for my mother to have been helping me shower. And I accidentally hit the tap when I had turned around, and it put boiling hot water on her shoulder. And I remember looking at it as a child, and that I had done this to my mother, and just losing it and just panicked and so upset. And it was a horrifying looking burn. I mean, it had boils and everything. It was terrifying. Probably 2nd or 3rd degree burn. And she yelled at me, right? and she scorned me, and she would sit there, I remember, with the bandage on her shoulder and just glare at me with just this curdling hatred. And there were other moments too, like one time I had been sewing, and my mother taught me how to sew, how to cook. I was sewing and I had left the needle on the carpet, and she stepped on it, and I remember there was just blood. And of course I'm freaking out, like, oh my God, are you okay? Get away from me, like, look what you've done, and just yelling, screaming, horrible. And even after the initial shock, just scornful and hateful and just angry. And just the shame and humiliation that I felt, like I had my head like down and I could barely even raise my head from it. And then of course there was like the major thing, which was when my younger brother got hit by a car. This was the first time. He actually doesn't even know about this. There were many things that happened in our childhood that my brother doesn't know about. And this was one of them. So he and I were on one side of the street. My mother was on the other side. I can't even remember the details of exactly what happened. I think he wanted to go back across the street to get something. So he went across the street, got hit by a car. And I went running over, and I was like, God, how old was I? Like 7 or 8? I was maybe 8 years old. And I was just stood there. I didn't know. I was in shock. He's like lying on the ground, unconscious. And my mother comes over, witnesses it, and she instantly just started attacking me physically. A very weird reaction to seeing your child lying in the street is to physically attack your other child. Not the driver of the car, nothing else, attack me. And it was really weird because it was almost like you could just see that that's how she was wired, where it was like when her faculties shut down, she just instantly reacted by physically attacking me. It was like that was her outlet, her natural outlet for attack. And the bystanders had to take her off of me. So, while there's still like her son on the ground to attend to, luckily my brother, he survived that. It was horrific. I remember he had these pins in his leg, like metal pins that had to be cleaned. And it was gory. I felt so guilty that I didn't even feel like I deserved to live. And she shunned me really badly for that one too. And I had to clean his wounds, help him clean his wounds. And we'd pour this peroxide on these metal stakes going into his bare skin, and he would be like, oh, and it was so horribly traumatizing for me. And I'm allowed to talk about that. I understand, obviously, it's not lost on me how traumatizing it was for him in that moment, but that's one thing I was never allowed to talk about, was how certain things affected me, and that was horrible. So I guess for me in my life, I'd never actually been able to say I'm sorry and have someone just say, I forgive you. Yet here, people were expecting me to know how to forgive, right? All the comments on videos I make about my mother, people say, forgive, 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 forgive. I'd never been forgiven in my life until that day. So I felt like that was somehow a missing piece that kind of clicked into place for me. And it just hit me. It was like a completion in that area of my life where someone had shown me how to forgive, and I accepted their forgiveness, and I recognized also how to forgive myself, right? Sometimes when we come from these backgrounds, we have to learn to do things for ourselves that we never had done for us, or that we never saw or experienced or had modeled. But that was one thing that I just hadn't really crossed my mind. I forgive you. Wow. Thank you. And so I started thinking about my mother, and over the next week or two, I was just aware that something fundamentally had changed within me, and that the resentment was gone. I had found throughout my life, when I would deal with really difficult things and I would have to deal with them alone, I would default into blaming and thinking about and grinding an axe about my mother, and how she had not chosen a good father for me, which I think is the number one most important decision a woman will ever make in her life if she's having children, is who will be the father of her children. And my mother couldn't care less. That's how I saw it. And she, not only did she not provide me with the emotional building blocks for a healthy self-esteem, she actually went out of her way to try and damage and hurt me as much as humanly possible before sending me out into the world. She had evil within her, and I think evil is what happens when we don't take responsibility for our behavior, because what history is not understood will be repeated. And my mother was passing down trauma and pain and abuse and neglect that was generations old, right? Her mother was a woman, my grandmother was a woman who had 10 children with an alcoholic. Most people who had 10 children with an upstanding man with a good job still couldn't hack it. They would be going under. But this is what my grandmother did. No one ever talked about this in the family. No one ever acknowledged it. No one ever came out and talked about the pain that these children experienced based on, how they were raised and what happened to them. There's a lot of mental illness, suicide, people who've passed on their pain to their children. So it's that generational trauma still going. And it really bothered me, because if someone, let's say, goes out and gets a dog, okay? And, they're taking care of this dog. Let's say they decide one day, I'm gonna go and get another dog. 9 months later, they realize how much work a dog is. Maybe they're starting to feel, I'm a little bit over my head on this, You know what? Actually, they're gonna get 3 dogs. You know what? No, I'm gonna get 4. I'm gonna get 5. I'm gonna get 5 dogs. They have 5 dogs. They're like, I can't really afford this. I can't really take care of them. These dogs are in the backyard. They're ripping everything up. They're biting people and getting put down because of it. They don't know how to behave. I don't know how to take care of them. I don't have the energy for this. I know, I'll just get 5 more dogs, right? So if you knew someone who had 10 dogs, running wild in their backyard, getting diseases, acting insane, being nuisances, suffering because they are not being provided the care and treatment that they should have. Most people would be outraged. They would be outraged. They'd be losing their minds. But people do this with children, and no one bats an eyelash, or no one comes out and says it. There was only one family that I remember who spoke up on my behalf for my mother neglecting and abusing me. And I remember them to this day. And I remember them talking to me separately and telling me this. And it made a difference in my life, because what everyone was trying to tell me was that my mother loved me and she was trying the best she could. And that directly conflicted with my experience of her and living in the house with her every single day. So that really created for me later in life the ability to not really trust my judgment. And I have very good judgment. And I trust my judgment now. But that's how those cycles repeat. When you see a child who's suffering and you feel uncomfortable with it, so you give the child platitudes and you say, oh, your mother loves you, your parents were trying the best they could, they start to think, oh, this is what love feels like, right? And then they go on and continue that pattern, right? They get in abusive relationships, you know, they have children they can't take care of, and the cycle continues. But for me, because I had a good head on my shoulders, and because I had learned to read, and I was reading books on philosophy, children's philosophy, from a very young age. I remember there was this book series. Please, if you know this book series, let me know, because I can't remember what it was called to this day. But it was a Christian book series for children. It had many books. I think it was maybe like 100 of these picture books. And each one was a moral dilemma, right? So it'd be like, Bobby and Jackie are friends. One day, Bobby sees Jackie do something bad. Should he tell? It was like stuff like that. And then the books would get more and more complex, and it would discuss all sides of the issue. And I was reading stuff like that from a young age, so I feel like part of that really helped me to keep a clear head in this situation that I was being raised up in. And also, I do feel like some of that is innate in me. You know, I have an innate striving for virtue and for truth. And I've had that from a very young age. And this leads me into like the next kind of part of this whole puzzle, which is that came together, which is my appreciation for myself. You know, I would look back on my life and I would think there was no one there who knew the depths of what I suffered and who was there with me through it all and who loved me unconditionally. And then I realized that that story was not true. I was a witness. I was there. I sustained myself. I got back up every time I was kicked down with no one to give me a hand to get back up. I got up and went to jobs I hated so I could survive. I got my high school diploma. I went to college. I worked so hard. I protected my own self from danger. You know, looking back, I would think to myself, man, God, would it have been nice to have someone on my side? To have, you know, a dad at home to feel safe, to know that I could trust my mom and go to her about things. And I didn't have that. And in my mind, I was just focused on that. And I wasn't able to really get to the point of gratitude for myself, like, wow, I really took care of myself. I protected myself. I didn't get involved with, you know, abusive men or alcoholics like my mother did. I didn't, you know, fall into promiscuity, teen pregnancy, drugs, drinking, anything like that. Despite my mother justifying her behavior to me, you know, I would go to her. I remember when I asked her in elementary school, I said, you know, Mom, I don't know what the word slut means. These are the kids are telling me this word slut. That's and the schoolyard about you. I don't know what it means. And she got really mad and she told me, people can love whoever they want to love. Your friends' parents might be married, but married people get divorced. Right? So she told me this instead of, you know, just saying, you know what? Oh my God, that really hurts me to hear that. Let me explain to you what this means. And I'll tell you the mistakes I made because I care about you and I don't want you to go through the same thing I did. And I wish I had made different choices for you. Right? Imagine if she had done that instead. But I had to do that for myself. And I learned to appreciate myself for that. So that was one branch on my tree. that got transformed from one thing to another. The branch went from, I had no one to look out for and protect me, and no one on my side. And it switched into, I took great care of myself with what I had. I looked out for myself, and I did a damn good job. I remember so many times too, I'm gonna make a video about this in the future, about all the different ways I've been red pilled in my life from like a very young age. I learned that adults were people too. I remember being in a specific mindset as a child where you just accept it. You just accept their authority, you don't question it, you're just like, yeah, it's an adult, they know. I learned that lesson really quick. And I remember so many times when I stood up for myself. There was this one time, I think was this in junior high? This was like maybe in grade 7. We had this math teacher, and in our math class, now I grew up in a multicultural neighborhood, so there were, like I've talked about in other videos, but there was like Polish people, Lebanese people, Vietnamese people, Korean, Chinese, Filipino people, but for dark-skinned people, it was just me and another girl in the class. And I remember there was this one teacher, no one would pay attention to his class. And at the end of his class, at a certain point, he suddenly started saying, yeah, so I need you all to look at this chalkboard. This chalkboard, which is, you know, the same skin color as, you know, Adele and this other girl. I remember we would look up and be like, what? He's like, and he'd have this weird look on his face, like he was like kind of trembling and like holding back anger in this weird way, and he would say, yeah, this chalkboard is the same color as your skin. And we'd just sit there like, okay. And this actually happened a couple of times. I actually told my mother, she called the school. When I went in the next day, I was walking down, I had gone to the washroom, and then I was walking down the empty hallway, going back to class, and this teacher, almost like he had been waiting for me, steps out from the principal's office, and he goes, I need to speak to you. Can you come in here? Right? And, okay, I went and I sat down, closes the door, and he sits there and he goes, I heard you have a problem with my jokes. And I remember looking at this man, just this weird, immature malice on his face. I specifically remember saying, yes, I do. And he goes, why? And I said, well, I don't think they're about math, sir. And he goes, yeah, but they're jokes, so why not? And I remember it was just this weird, immature, inappropriate and unprofessional attitude. And so finally I just said, I think they're inappropriate. And he just kind of stopped. And I could just kind of see, you know, something go on in his brain. I'm not exactly sure what it was. And so I got up and I left. And I remember after that, when I came to school, he would regard me with this weird sense of respect. Okay, this grown man, he tried to bully this little girl with an afro and Coke bottle glasses and no father in the picture. And I remember at my junior high grad, he actually came up to me and just told me he was like really proud of me in a really genuine way. And I was like, thank you, you know. He didn't say what he was proud of me for, but I said thank you very much. So, you know, looking back in my life, all I could see was how I'd been a victim. And I'd really recently, along with appreciating the things from my childhood and the things that my mother did do for me, I started to appreciate the times that I had been a hero to myself and not a victim. The times I had been strong and smart and resilient and loyal and virtuous. And that's what I would encourage anyone who grew up in that kind of environment. You start to see yourself as this weak, sad, beaten down thing. So let's all just take a deep breath. This life is so difficult. It's so challenging for so many people. I see so many people just out on the street that I just want to hug, because here we are in these bodies that don't come with a manual, and this life that's a mystery. I just want people to know that you are forgiven. Look for your stories of triumph and take your twisted branches and make them into the stories of the great person you can become rising out of that. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
You like watching TV?
No, I like hearing my tape.
Yeah, but you don't get to hear your tapes all the time, do you?
No.
You like Reading Rainbow? Who's the guy in Reading Rainbow?
The barn.
Do you like him?
Yes.
He's cute, isn't he?
Yes.
What are you going to be when you grow up?
A farmer.